Good evening, everybody. It is Saturday. We are back for another BS and a beer. The Flute has returned because sliding into view, we'll see. We'll see how this one goes in all aspects. I say that a lot. But it is rather fancy looking, and it is right here we have from Brouwer. I cannot know how to pronounce it. Brouwerij, I believe, but it's Lindemans, located in Vlezenbeek, Belgium, in, once again, the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium. And this is the Faro Lambic. Now, if I remember my beer lore correctly, yep, 100% remember my beer lore correctly. It is corked as well. Always remembered Lindemans did that. And I have this, and I have that. So I'm going to pause because the phone's in my way and I don't want to destroy everything. So 1 second. We're back, and the one thing I always fear, and that I have done numerous times with things in the past, is the cork actually disintegrating. Thankfully, it came out in one piece. So now let us talk about this beer, and I love the label on this one, as opposed to the others, which are more yellow. A Lambic beer, we'll get to that in a minute, but let's see if it's actually good first, because it doesn't say it on there, but I do remember that this is a 2018 vintage. Yep, we're golden. We are golden. So into the Flute it goes, and then I will flip it around, and we'll have a talk about what exactly this stuff is, and then dig into... Okay, that's about what I was expecting after 7 years, even with the amount of sugar that's in there. But it looks pretty good. Actually, through the phone, I do see there is some carbonation, but I can't see it in reality. So, one moment, and we will be flipping over. And we're back. Now, the Lambic, to best explain it, is essentially to compare this style of beer to champagne. In that, much like with champagne, you can't legally, although there's not a legal thing for this, I don't think, you can't legally call it a champagne unless it is made in the Champagne region of France. So basically, anything in America, they have to call it sparkling wine or something along the lines. Much like with the Lambics, they have to be, for it to be called a true Lambic, you know, they have variations of it. A lot of American breweries actually do some, but for it to be a true, proper Belgian Lambic, it has to be, I don't know the exact geographical distance, but it has to be within a certain distance of the city of Brussels, of which Vlezenbeek is. If I remember looking at the map correctly, it was a little southwest of Brussels proper. But mainly, it has to be in what the Flemish or the Dutch would call this. I think it would be the Zen or the Sen. I think the only difference really is swapping out an S for a Z or a Z for all of my non-American friends. But it has to be in the Zen Valley or surrounding Brussels, because one of the key elements, and this is a beer that goes back a long way, 13th century, they found out that this particular style of beer was being brewed. I already covered that in a previous episode. Don't worry, calm down. But it is naturally fermented in that, unlike most beers, they'll add the yeast in a very controlled environment. Lambics, for the most part, are essentially wild. Like, literally, they are exposed to the air and are fermented with naturally occurring yeasts and bacteria that are native to that valley. And there's all kinds of different ones. They do fruit ones. I'm going to actually take a sip of this and let's see how it goes. Okay. Kind of has that dry champagne-y smell, which you kind of expect because of what it is, but I'll get to that in a moment. Not much else. This should have a little bit, I know the style, but not this particular one, should have a little bit of tartness, a little bit of that sour, and hopefully a little sweetness, but we'll find out in a moment. So, yep, actually that's exactly what it is. Slightly tart, but a lot of sweetness. Now, they do a lot of Lambics for people that have probably seen these guys, seen these guys before. Lindemans. Probably the most popular selling one is the Framboise, which would be raspberry. They also do a bunch of other fruit variations. They also do one, it's simply called unblended. And that is, it's non-fruit flavored, and it's, essentially just the straight one. That is very tart and very delicious. The Faro, though, it's a little different. And this is not the traditional way that they would do it, bottling it, actually, because a true, proper, old-school Faro Lambic is a mix of older Lambic and freshly brewed beer. So they do it right on the spot, and right before they serve it, because it's, and a lot of people actually complained about this originally, that it was very, very not good aftertaste, they would add either brown sugar or some sort of caramel or molasses, because they wanted it to add sugar without adding extra carbonation, which is why champagne is extremely carbonated, because there's a metric butt ton of sugar in there. But that said, this is good. And I also failed to mention, this is Lambics as a whole are lower in alcohol. This is 4.5%. I think the Framboise is like 3.8. But it's not meant for the heavy-duty consumption. This is really tasty. I really like that one. Okay, so this one goes out, shout out to Maiden's World of Wax. Thank you, my brother, because this is a good one. Like I said, I touched on it briefly in a Jank Pack Thursday about why I'm not really a basketball fan. See, I'm from Pittsburgh. You know, we have the Steelers, we have the Penguins, and, you know, at one point we actually had a baseball team back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. But basketball has always been one, because I didn't grow up with it, with a Pittsburgh team, never really got into it. I mean, everybody followed the Bulls in the 90s because of what they were doing, but I just really never got into it. And I know the majority of my family went to Pitt, the University of Pittsburgh, and back in the day, especially in the, we talked about yesterday, in the days of the old Big East, you know, they were one of the premier basketball conferences back then, but I didn't have any ties to Pitt, per se. And then when I went to a Division III school, you know, I didn't really go to basketball games much either. I think I've only been to 2 or 3 college basketball games in my life, and 2 of them were at my own school. So Megan said, well, dig a little deeper, because I just did a cursory glance when I rambled about that, so I figured I'll take about 15, 20 minutes of your lives. Sorry about that, by the way. No refunds. And talk about the history of basketball in Pittsburgh, because, man, it went a lot deeper than I thought. It starts back in the year 1899 with a team called Pittsburgh Southside, or as we would actually say it in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh Southside. I hide the accent just to make it easier for everybody. Essentially, they bounced back and forth between a league called the Central Basketball League and the Western Pennsylvania Basketball League, in 2 different iterations of the CBL. They won the Western PA Basketball League Championship in 1904 and 1913, and during a stint, they won the Central Basketball League Championship in 1907. Now, here's where it gets even crazy. Here's where it starts to get crazy, I should say. I'll put logos and whatnot up there. The year is 1908, or for the 1908 season, because it actually happened December the 31st, 1907. It was a player, this guy right there, by the name of Harry Huff, became, while playing for Pittsburgh Southside, became the highest paid professional basketball player in the world. They signed him to a contract that was $300 a month to play 8 league games per month. And essentially, I worked it out with inflation and whatnot. In today's money, that would be equivalent to about $124,000 a year, I should say. So not that great, but, for back then, that was, like I said, the highest paid basketball player in the world. And also, he actually has a record. In the 1909 to 1910 season, he made 963 free throws, which I believe is a record that still stands today. However, there is a reason for that, because back in that day in basketball, apparently, every team had one guy that was designated to shoot free throws, and Harry Huff was that. And now, we move on a little bit, because Pittsburgh Southside eventually faded away when those leagues folded in the times leading up to World War I. Then came, and this is interesting. I've never heard of this before, and this is actually I can't remember who had it, but the name is trademarked to this day. It was called the Black Fives League. It lasted essentially from 1904 to 1950, right up until about the time the NBA began to integrate. Pittsburgh had a team there, bounced back and forth between Monticello and it's Lendi. Dad, if you know this one, correct me in the comments about the spelling. I want to say Lendi, but it was Lendi Athletic Club. And they were around from 1912 until the Black Fives League eventually terminated in 1950, and then the NBA started absorbing everything. There was a name that I know, and a name that I forgot had such deep ties to Pittsburgh, and not just deep ties to Pittsburgh, but basketball, more specifically. It was a name, and also they basically said that this man was the best basketball player in the league. Zach, put up the picture. That man went by the name of Cumberland Posey, or Cum Posey. Baseball fans, you recognize that name? You will in a minute. Because part of it, when he was playing for, the first time for Monticello, they won the Black Fives championship in 1912, the first year they had ever come into existence, relatively unknown, and they were playing a very established powerhouse team. I think it was Howard University that had been around since the inception in 1904 and were considered the dominant team, and the Monticello Athletic Club took them out. And then also won 4 consecutive championships from 1920 to 1923 with Lendi. Now, here's where the baseball part comes in, because he was also a player, manager, and ultimately part owner of the Homestead Grays, one of the 2 Pittsburgh Negro League teams that ultimately, by the time they won the Negro League World Series, they had moved to Washington, D.C., but still kept the name the Homestead Grays. So when Josh Gibson was winning all those championships in the 40s, they were based out of Washington, D.C., but still had the Homestead name. But anyway, he was there from 1918 to 1935, and because of his contributions, was elected to the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame in the year 2006. And then, also for his contributions to the game of basketball, was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, class of 2016. And he is from the neighborhood of Homestead, Pennsylvania. For other history buffs, the Homestead Steel Strike. That's exactly where that was. I never knew that. Like, I knew the name, and I had forgotten the heavy ties he had, and like how dominant a player he was. Because people were saying, like, they put him on par with every other. I think the one name I recognized right off the rip when I was reading it, I think it was Oscar Charlton. They compared Cum Posey to him and said even that he would pale in comparison to the, quote, meek-looking Cum Posey, who I believe I read was 5'9", $140, but arguably one of the most dominant basketball players in the country at the time, which I think is kind of cool. And he played for Pittsburgh team. We're going to take a sip. Yes, we are. Oh, that smells nice. Now, it's getting to that point where it's almost like that running joke. It's like it's either really bad meat or really good cheese, because now we're getting kind of that funk, which is, and champagne will tell you the same thing. It kind of has, as weird as this sounds, but you'll know exactly what I mean. It's kind of like that weird muted body odor funk, and that is a sign of a very, very good thing. And when they bottle it, they put the sugar in there. So that is why it is still 8 years later, 2018, 7 years later, still incredibly sweet. So now, that league was still going on, and then we have, this is interesting, Zach logo. Actually, no, there's no logo, because I couldn't find one. I found like 2 pictures of anybody in this uniform. That is a uniform of somebody in the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yeah, the Pittsburgh Pirates basketball team were a founding member of the National Basketball League. Played from 1937 to 1939. Pretty much unremarkable. Let's see, and then World War II happened, so they took the break. Then they came back in 1944 for the 1944-45 season, boom, as them. And here we go, the Pittsburgh Raiders. They played that one season in the National Basketball League, the NBL, and then they were independent from 1946 to 1950, although they really weren't around, and then officially dissolved in 1950. So, another brief blip, but a founding member of a league. Speaking of founding members of a league, let us move ahead to the 1946-1947 season. That is the first season of what was then called the Basketball Association of America, but would eventually become the National Basketball Association, the NBA. The Pittsburgh Ironmen, great logo, great name, we need it back, were one of the founding members of the National Basketball Association in 1946. They played one season, again, very unremarkable, record of 15-45, extremely unremarkable. Dad, this one's for you, boom, put it up there, Zach. That is their old building, the old Duquesne Gardens. Yeah, I'll get into Pittsburgh speech and whatnot in a different one, but the fact that we can actually pronounce Duquesne correctly is kind of remarkable. I'll get into that at some point. That building, unfortunately, was demolished in 1956. And ultimately, not only did Pittsburgh have one of the founding members of the NBA, it also got the honor of the very first ever NBA draft pick, or the BAA draft pick, what would become the NBA. They drafted a man by the name of Clifton McNeely. Ever hear of him? Neither have I. Nobody else has, because never once played any sort of professional basketball, much like the very first NFL draft pick, and now I'm blanking on the name, never played professional football. Now here's another name. A name that I actually did not know because I'm not familiar with this team. I mean, I knew the name, but I did not know the time. We come to the American Basketball League. A team by the name of the Pittsburgh Wrens. It was the Pittsburgh Renaissances, but shortened to Wrens. Played in the 1961-62 season. And a man by the name of, well, here he is right there. And that's not a Wrens jacket, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. That is Connie Hawkins, Basketball Hall of Fame class of 1992, and the American Basketball League MVP in the lone season he played there in 1962. Apologies there. I had to pause because I realized that I left part of my notes over at the other table. Definitely needed that. So now, after the Wrens and the American Basketball League, turn our attention to the ABA, the American Basketball Association, and the Pittsburgh Pipers. I get maybe probably pipe fitting, I don't know, but the Pittsburgh Pipers played in the inaugural, once again, ABA season 1967 and 1968. Connie Hawkins returns. And that the picture before was him in the Pipers uniform, because not only did he help the Pipers win the inaugural ABA, American Basketball Association, championship in 1968, he was also the regular season and playoff MVP. Basically, you could say that the Pittsburgh Wrens essentially saved his career, because he was part of the, wrongfully accused, by the way, as history will say, the Iowa point shaving scandal, and no NBA team would touch him. So he played a year for the Wrens, went and spent a couple of years with the Harlem Globetrotters, came back to the Pipers, and played the following season with them before going to the NBA. And here's where it gets crazy, because the Pittsburgh Pipers played from 67 to 68 season. Then they moved to Minnesota. Boom. The Minnesota Pipers. They were there in 1968 and 1969. Then they came back to Pittsburgh. 1969 to 1970, they were once again the Pittsburgh Pipers. And then the final iteration, boom, that needs to come back. From 1970 to 1972, they were the Pittsburgh Condors. And at that point after that, attendance was down. They tried to shop the team around. Nobody was interested, so the Condors folded after the 1972 season. Now there's a gap. Relatively big gap. From 1972, we have to go to 1994. This is the first time Pittsburgh has had a basketball team since I have been alive. It was the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association. It was the Pittsburgh Piranhas. Never heard of them. They played 1 year, the 94-95 season, and that was it. They finished second in they lost the championship, and then the team folded that year. Or after that year, I should say. And then we moved to the Pittsburgh explosion of the ABA back to the American Basketball Association. They were around from 04 to 08 in 2 iterations. Well, 3 technically. The first one, the initial name that they brought in was the Pennsylvania Hard Hats. I'm glad that didn't materialize. I don't think there's even a mock-up of what that logo would be. And again, this is 2004. But for the first 2 years, they were in the ABA as the Pennsylvania Pit Bulls. And then after that, they went to the CBA again, the Continental Basketball Association, as the Pittsburgh Explosion, with no E. They'd see, when they were in the Continental Basketball Association, the CBA, both times they went to the semifinals and lost, shout out Brandon Jensen, to the Minot Skyrockets. Both clean sweeps, 2-0. So then we had one more. That's it. It was the following year. Another ABA team came in, the Pittsburgh Phantoms. Pretty cool logo. Lasted 1 year. Didn't play. I don't think even played the whole season. And that's it. There has not, in my lifetime, there have been 3 iterations of professional basketball. And it makes me wonder. Well, it makes me do this, and then it makes me wonder. That's just nice. That's really nice. But it does make me wonder. Like, looking at the early history especially, you have guys like Cum Posey, baseball and basketball Hall of Famer. Connie Hawkins, basketball Hall of Famer. The great tradition of Big East and University of Pittsburgh basketball. Why? Why did basketball not stick around? And I think that's a genuine thing, because a lot of basketball games have come through Pittsburgh over the years, like a lot of neutral site games. I know, the Harlem Globetrotters, my dad remembers seeing them when he was younger. But that's a question. That's the question. Like, what was it about basketball and about Pittsburgh where it just couldn't stick? Like, they had a pretty decent run with the Condors in the 70s, or in the early 70s, but people just lost interest. I mean, maybe around that time, because the Condors went out in 1972. It was around that time the Steelers started to get a little hot, because 1972 was the year of the Immaculate Reception. So maybe that had something to do with it. Couple the fact that the Pirates won the World Series in 1971. I don't know. The Penguins were a fledgling team at that point. Only came around in the expansion in 67. So it's like, why did hockey stick around? Why did football stick around? Why did baseball stick around? Why didn't basketball? Why did basketball stick around in, neighboring areas? Like, Cleveland has a team. Philadelphia has a team. I will never understand it. It's just one of those things. I genuinely wonder what in the world about Pittsburgh and basketball just didn't mesh. I mean, clearly there was something, because like I say, I've been around since 1982, and there's been 3 basketball teams in Pittsburgh, and they were semi-pro. The ABA, the Piranhas, in the CBA, like, this is semi-pro basketball. So genuinely curious, and it's like, Pittsburgh's a big sports market, but yet, basketball is just not a thing. I don't know, but Maiden, I appreciate that, brother. This was a fun one. I had to do a little running around here because I for whatever reason, I kind of rushed near the end of it and forgot some of the notes, but we made it work in the end. A little janky, but what on my channel isn't these days. So that's actually going to do it. That was fun. Like, and that's why I like doing this, and why I'm glad that you guys kick ideas to me here and there. Yesterday and future episodes from Julie Farnham, this one from Maiden. I've got some other ideas written down. Like, this is really cool. I really enjoy doing this. And again, hope you enjoy watching it. God knows why you would if you do. So we're going to finish this off, and there's still a little bit more left of this, but we will figure out something to do with that. Wink. But we are going to end it, since this is the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium. I will once again enrage all of freedom sufferers' sensibilities and ancestors. And I will say, come on, Zach, you can do it. Sante, mein Frenden, or cheers, my friends. So we will have another sip. We'll drain off the first flute, and that'll be fine. God, that is nice. That is just so nice. Now I'm wondering, like, what would it be fresh? I don't know. Might have to try that at some point. But that's it. Thank you guys for stopping by. I really appreciate you. I always do. It means a lot. Let me know what you thought. And again, anything weird you got going on in your brain that you don't want to research or have in your search history, call this guy. Or, let me know. I'll see what I can do with it. But that's going to do it. Next week, we'll figure out something to do. Like I say, I'm probably going to touch on something in the spooky season at some point, but we will get to that when it comes to it. And I'm going to leave you with this parting thought. If you think about it, there is a reason that only one sock seems to go missing. Because if both went, you wouldn't even notice it. Have a good night, everybody.